Okay, so today in the Food Photography Show, we are going to be talking about camera settings and the fact that we don't actually need that many settings on our camera to work with food or drink. Now, I work off Nikon, so my camera back might look slightly different to yours, but the settings that I'm going to take you through today are going to be on each camera. So let's get started with the things that we can do with our cameras that make our food photography and our drink photography much better without us trying to move and change hundreds of different settings and thinking I don't know anything about my camera. So the first thing that we just need to have a nod to really is the exposure triangle. Now, the exposure triangle itself is not a button on the camera. It is three things on your camera that work together that we have to keep our eye on all three when we're photographing, and these are the things that you're going to be moving the most while you're taking photos and making decisions about your photography. So this consists of the aperture, the shutter speed and the ISO, and we're going to break these down and look at them differently. So the exposure triangle has, as just mentioned, the aperture, the shutter speed and the ISO. The ISO is all about the light and the quality of the light in your images. And if you are old like me, your ISO was the equivalent of you buying a film camera when you were younger. We used to be able to buy a 100, a 200 or a 400. That's the equivalent now of the ISO. The ISO moves up the numbers to give us more light in our camera. However, there's always a downside with the exposure triangle. The more we move up the ISO numbers, the more grain we get in our imagery. So the trade-off for getting more light in your camera with the ISO is to get more grain in that camera. The shutter speed. The shutter speed is measured in fractions, a third, a 200th of a second, a 15th of a second, a 4,000th of a second. And the shutter speed is there to show movement in what you do. You can have a beautiful runny drizzle, or sprinkling in your imagery will be dots or it will be rain dependent on your shutter speed. The lower the number you go on your shutter speed, the more light you let into the camera. And lastly, the aperture. The aperture is the lens eye, and this is all about how much depth of field you are going to have in your image. How much of the background do you want blurred? How much of it do you want in focus? The lower that you go on your numbers means that you are opening up the eye and you are making it brighter, whereas if we go up the numbers, down the numbers, we make it go darker. So photo at f16 is going to be a lot darker than a photo at f5.6. Okay, so let's have a look at that now in a bit more depth, the aperture and the depth of field. So we want to control what we've got in focus. So these two images here are taken with exactly the same settings from exactly the same place with my camera. But the difference is I've just moved my aperture from f10 to 5.6, and this shows us what we get with our imagery. So the depth of field here shows the cakes at the back, the teacup and the teapot are in focus pretty much there with f10. But if we move that to 5.6, we can see the difference here, that we're losing that depth of field and getting that blurredness in the background. So that's what shows us what we can do on our cameras with the aperture of how much of that background do we want in focus, how much of it do we want sharp. We're controlling the depth of field. The second one here is the shutter speed. So we're freezing time, we're capturing motion. So what I've done here is I have sprinkled over my poor strawberries the icing sugar to see how that creates the blur and what it does. And we're looking at that on 1/6 of a second, and we're looking on that of 200th of a second. So let's just go in on this slower shutter speed and look at what it does here. We're not getting a nice sprinklage here. We've got we're seeing everything. We're seeing every tiny little thing, and we're seeing that movement in the image. This is not so great if we're wanting one of those beautiful sprinkly shots of our icing sugar. So let's now move over to 200ths of a second. That's when we start to get back to the dots. So if you're getting rain or you're getting cloudy smoke, you know that your shutter speed needs to change. And then lastly, we've got ISO and image noise. Now, the sensitivity of the ISO is a big thing in your cameras, and it can affect the grain in what you do. However, the better the cameras have got over the years, it does such a much better job of not putting any grain into that image. And I really struggle to show you a grainy image, so I'm going to show you what my camera setting was for you to see that you can ramp up your ISO nowadays without the grain coming in. The key thing I would say to you here is make sure you zoom in. If you're using a high ISO, keep zooming in on your food to ensure that there isn't any grain. So on this one at the end, I had the ISO at 64. So it should be sharp, sharp, sharp. Here we have a very average setting of the ISO at 200 on my camera. Again, that is my Nikon camera. Your camera might be different. And here we have the ISO at 5000. Now, obviously, it's not a great image, but it's to show you that even at 5000 on this image, I'm still not getting any grain in the background. So it really, really is dependent on your camera and your settings and what kind of day it is and how dark it is and how light as to what level that grain will start to come into your imagery. So the fourth thing that I want to talk to you about today is your white balance. The color of your white balance really does change in terms of what happens with the food. And the white balance is measured in Kelvin. And normally my camera is always on manual white balance, and would normally be around the 5600 mark. And what I wanted to show you here is if we've got our food I took this to the extremes of the white balance. At a 2600 Kelvin white balance, it's too yellow. At 8900, it's too blue. We don't want to go too cool. We don't want to go too warm. We want to sit in the middle. And the reason that we want to keep our white balance on manual is that we want to show that the image stays the same throughout the day. If you have your white balance on automatic, as the change of the sun goes around or as things happen with the ambient light, your white balance is going to change and your photos won't be consistent. And if you're photographing a whole range of imagery that's going on a website next to each other, it needs to be consistent. Therefore, keeping on a manual white balance will really help you out. So you have two options on your camera of whether you are going to focus on a single point or a continuous point. And what we want to do with food is we want to keep it on AFS and not AFC. The difference is if you are on single, you will be able to only take the photo when your camera is in focus. If you're on continuous, something that you may use with a dog running towards you, the camera will still take when you're out of focus. And that is not a great look for our food and drink. So keeping your camera on the AFS at all times, unless you've got something that you are trying to create lots of movement, is the place that you want to be. If we then look at the different ways other than single and continuous, we have to think about now what it is that we actually want to focus on when we look through our camera. When we look through our camera, we have got the single point on there, but we also want to start looking at how much of the image we want to get in focus and how much of we want it blurred. For example, you might want to just focus on the hero, the cake, and all of the background like the teapot and the teacup out of focus. So we need to start thinking about the focus points that we have on our camera. And again, different manufacturers will have different amounts of focus points and different ways of using them. You can have the whole screen, you can have something wide, you can have where it focuses in the middle but it takes the whole lot, you can have a dynamic range. But what we normally use for food is the single point or the next one up from the single point. These are great for us to decompress the button halfway and move the point over the hero of what we want, sharp as anything in our image. If we've got the whole image all in focus, all the same, it loses that effect on the hero that we're trying to guide everyone's eyes to. So on the back of your camera, you will be able to see with your make what it is that you put yours on, but you're looking for the smallest one or the next one up on your focus points. Okay, then we are looking at the self timer trick. If your kids have got bored helping you out, or you always feel like you need an extra pair of hands, or you need your images to be sharper, the self timer trick is fantastic. The self timer works for two different reasons. The self timer is great when you put your camera on a tripod. However much we try and keep our camera steady and not moving, even if we press the button on our camera, it can still move the camera even just a tiny bit. And if you're shooting really, really close up, you're going to need to keep your eye on shooting that close up. So the best thing that you can do is not touch your camera at all. And yes, you can tether, but that is not part of the camera settings. We're talking about something else here, and that's using your self timer. With your self timer, you can put on a 2-second timer and the camera will take a photo for you without you even touching the camera. Therefore, it is as sharp as it can be, and that's the best you can do if you're not tethering. So use that self timer trick to have that photo taken. You can decide how much of a delay you want on your timer, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. You can decide what works for you to have that. Now, there is a 2-second timer you can use when you just want the camera to take the image. You can also use a 10-second timer, which is what I use it for the most, is when I am drizzling, pouring, doing something where I need another pair of hands and I don't have one, I set my camera to timer and I go round and drizzle, pour, put a fork into something and use the timer to take a series of photos. You can set up how many photos it takes for you. Mine, I think, takes 7 or 10, and you can do lots of different pours, drizzles, and you don't need to be asking anyone else for their help. Hurrah! So this kind of thing can be done on your own with that self timer. Don't feel you've got to wait for someone else to always be helping you with your photography. The self timer has 2 different modes. It can be used to make your image sharper if you're not tethering, or also give you that extra pair of hands. And lastly, RAW versus JPEG. You always want your images to be RAW as long as you can process them on your device. Just to give you an idea of the difference of RAW to JPEG, let's just use the analogy of RAW has 50 layers of color in its bank. If the camera chooses and changes it to JPEG, it will take that down to about 10 different colors. So if you're using RAW, you've got a whole wealth of extra color, data, everything you need to use your RAW. And JPEG is the camera deciding what to edit and what to change. You want to be in control of this. So if you shoot RAW, you're the one that makes all the changes on those colors, how sharp it is, everything else you want to do with it. So where possible, please do photograph in RAW. You will find different things on the back of your camera. If at the moment you don't know how to process the RAWs, you can always shoot in RAW and JPEG, but obviously that takes up more room on your storage. For me, I would just shoot RAW all the way, and then I can convert the ones I want to use into a JPEG. So that is all of our points that you want to use on your camera. That is it. If you've got 64 million other buttons on your camera, you do not need to use them with your food photography. You might have a few anomalies here and there that you want to use, but these are the definitive things that you need for the camera settings. So let's just have a recap of those. The first is you will be moving between your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO to get the most light into the camera, to get the right depth of field, and to get the right movement into what you do. Your white balance needs to be on a manual white balance, and you need to ensure that your image isn't cooled down too much and isn't warmed up at all. Warm food looks yellow, icky, doesn't look great. Focus mode. Food doesn't move, so your autofocus doesn't need to go onto a continuous. It can stay on a single. Focus points. Don't let your camera decide what's in focus and what isn't. Get it on one of the smaller settings, decompress the button halfway and move it around. Self-timer, 2 different ways to use this. One, to keep your image really sharp with a 2-second timer, and number 2, with a 10-second timer. You have your own hands. You have an extra pair of hands there to help you out. And lastly, image styles and files. Please shoot in RAW where possible. It will give you a wealth of information that you can use that will help you when you're editing your images and finishing your images off. So thanks very much for your time today. I hope that helps with your camera settings and the things that you actually need, and all the things in the menu that you don't actually need for food photography. If you like what I've done today, please do subscribe to the channel, and then you will be alerted each week when a new episode comes out. Thanks so much for your time today. Take care. Bye.